This story is 100% true and totally bizarre for us. I have no idea what to make of it, and I was hoping you all could help shed some light on it. It's a long story, since there is a lot of other paranormal experiences I need to tell you about that happened leading up to the main event I'm going to talk about, which was a demon in my child's room. So please bear with the long introduction about our other experiences because I feel they're relevant. Okay, let me start off by saying that I have never been sensitive or experienced anything like this personally in my entire life until now. This is so outside my realm of experiences that I don't know what to make of it. And I'm posting here mainly because I want you guys' input on it, what you think is going on. I started off a skeptic, but I'm slowly changing my thinking after these events. So all this strangeness started about 3 months ago. My wife and I started seeing and hearing things around the house. Footsteps, muted voices in the walls, etc. For a while we were convinced that someone was living in our attic. After some fellow church members go up there for repairs, we know that was not the case. At one point our walls were vibrating rhythmically, almost like a phone, but we both had our phones and knew it wasn't any of our devices. These are the things I experienced as well, not just my wife. We also had another shared experience involving a video baby monitor, though which we could see floating orbs that would dance together in an intelligent way, always over the baby's crib. I know about cameras, and it was not due to reflections or dust. We could not see the other orbs with our eyes, but they would appear through the monitor. So I went to where they were showing on the screen and put out my hand. And as we watched on the screen, they would converge on my hand and dance around my hand. It was the most bizarre thing. My wife has suffered from sleep paralysis and seen a lot of strange things, including about 3 to 4 unique demon shadow people that would visit from time to time. They all looked different and had different feelings to them. The next morning, my wife would always tell me which ones had been present the night before. Sometimes they just stood and watched. Other times they would try to get my wife to react to them in some way. There was even a time when a light, good one came and talked with one of the dark ones. She says there is one in particular that comes and just stands for a very long time, and the only word she has for it is that it's curious and trying to learn about us. She says that one has been coming more regularly, and it just gives off this intense vibe of trying to learn about us for some nefarious purpose. She says if she just ignores them, they go away faster. So she has gotten really good at pretending like they are not there. About a month or so ago, my wife was going to the bathroom in the night and saw a figure standing at the top of the stairs at the end of the hall. She described it as being totally solid looking, around 5'6", with arms and legs that ended in points, not hands and feet. The head was almost totally spherical and was a lot larger than a normal human's head. It was standing on the floor, not floating above it. It was not blurry around the edges, but totally solid and crisp looking. She knew this was not the same entity which had visited a number of times already. The curious one that was a scout of some kind. It was trying to learn about us. She said it turned and saw her looking, and as soon as it saw her, it turned and walked through a closed door that leads to my office. She said it just phased through it like Harry and Ron going through the brick barrier leading to the Hogwarts Express. She continued to the bathroom, which butts up against the office, which is the next room over. The toilet is on the wall, and that is shared by both the bathroom and the office. She said the whole time she was on the toilet, she felt the entity in my office moving around and putting off a strange, darkly curious vibe. She said she almost got the courage to go barge into my office and confront it, but she decided she didn't want to agitate whatever it was, because she said they want her to react in some way. So she finished in the bathroom and came to bed and didn't sleep the rest of the night, listening for anything. She said soon after returning to bed, the feeling dissipated and it was gone. A few days later, my wife started hearing a specific low growling voice that told her to physically harm herself and that no one loved or cared about her. This voice was in her head, but out in the open room somewhere. She said it was from one of the same beings she would see in her sleep paralysis episodes. I didn't experience anything like this during this time, however, but I am not at all sensitive to anything paranormal, so I would not expect to be able to see or hear anything anyway. Okay, now is where things start getting really interesting, and this is where I started to witness some of the strangeness firsthand, in addition to the initial strange things my wife and I both experienced in the near beginning. So, a week later, during her morning shower, my wife said that an entity came into the bathroom and started trying to engage her in conversation. It was taunting her. It was not visible, but she could feel it. It was again one of the beings she would see during her sleep paralysis. She said it was not speaking verbally, but in thoughts. It wanted to get a response from her, but she ignored it and said it stayed in the room until she was done, getting angry at her and coming up directly behind her. Then it followed her out of the room when she was done, but then disappeared off into the house somewhere as she came downstairs. I had been watching our 2 sons while she was in the shower. She came down and I could tell there was something wrong, but all she said was, "I want to tell you something later." At the time, I didn't know anything about what she had experienced, which makes what happened next even more strange. A moment later, my younger son, who was 1.5, reaches up towards the stairs and starts pointing frantically. His finger is following something invisible as it moves across the room. His eyes are wide and he's trying to get down from my wife's lap. Right then, my older son, who is 3, reaches up and begins to point also. And I noticed they are both pointing in the same direction and following it with their eyes as if they are watching someone walking across the room. My younger son finally wiggles free and starts running across the room towards whatever they had been pointing at. Then my older son, who speaks very clearly, says, "Look, Gabriel is following that man in the dining room." My older son then follows and they both walk into the dining room. I follow them and I see my younger son pulling frantically at a bookshelf we use for our Bibles and Bible study books like dictionaries and concordance and things like that. I pick up my older son and I ask him what they are looking at. He said, "That man sitting on the Bible shelf." Both the boys were acting so strangely and started acting really wild for a few minutes until they calmed down. And after that, it was as if they both forgot about the entire thing. Fast forward 3 more days until last night, when something happened that was so strange and shook me up so much that I just had to get some advice on it, hence this post. So my wife went to put the younger son to bed, and I stayed down with the older son to read to him from his little kid's Bible, like I always do before bed. We read the story of Jesus healing the 10 lepers, and my son made a connection he never had before. He said, "Jesus can heal people? Jesus loves me." I was so proud of my son because of his insight from someone so young. And I told him I was proud of him. He just so happened to be holding a little wooden palm cross that he had been carrying around all day as a toy. I used this as a teaching moment, and I told him that the cross he was holding was a reminder that Jesus loves him. He held the cross lightly and said, "Jesus loves me." It was all very touching as a parent, and so I hugged him, and we headed up to brush his teeth. Well, after brushing his teeth and putting on a nighttime diaper and putting on his pajamas, we settled down into the rocking chair next to his crib for a little bedtime story before I tucked him in. He kept interrupting the story I was telling him by lightly holding his cross, which I decided to let him take to bed, and telling me that it meant Jesus loves him. I acknowledged what he was saying each time and patiently continued the story. Then something happened that stopped me in my tracks. My son started looking up at the ceiling and holding his cross closer to his chest. His eyes were moving around like he was watching something, but I didn't see anything. He kept this up until he said, "No, you cannot have my cross." I said, "Who are you talking to?" And he said, "That man up there. He says I can't have my cross." At this point, I'm a little shaken, but decided we're going to talk about the cross again. I tell him what it means, and I suggest we sing Jesus Loves Me. As we're singing, my son starts to whimper and looking up. I asked him what he was looking at, and he said, "That man. He says my cross is bad." At this point, I picked my son up and held him as we walked over to where he was pointing. He was pointing at something more than 6 feet high. I walk right over to where he's pointing, and as I do, my son writhes back in horror. I said, "Is he right there?" And I reached out my hand to where the head would have been according to where my son was looking and pointing. He says, "Yes, Dada." "Don't, he's getting mad." Then my son looks all around, like the thing I had just touched was now whirling around us until it appeared to stop right in front of us. I looked right where it should have been, around to where my son was looking, and I said in a firm, confident voice, "Get out of here now." I didn't yell, I just said it. Then I took my son and we sat back down on the rocking chair. I continued the story and my son appeared fine for a little while, until he started looking towards a specific spot and making whimpering sounds again. He said, "That man is very mad. He wants my cross." Right after that, my son starts screaming at the top of his lungs. Then all of a sudden, the cross he's been holding this whole time flies out of his hands with intense force and goes flying across the room, like it had been thrown hard. My son is crying and screaming at this point, and I did the only thing I could think of. I told whatever was in the room to leave by the authority of Jesus Christ. I said it firmly. My son stopped screaming almost right away and cuddles into me. "That man went away," he said. I calm my son and I tell another story until he's sleepy, and then I lay him in bed and leave the room. But just hold a second, because the story is about to get weirder. Now this was more than I had ever happened to me before. I mean, the cross flew across the room like it had been ripped from my son's hand with a very strong force. I didn't know what to make of it, but it got a lot stranger when I went into our bedroom to talk with my wife. As soon as I walked into my room, my wife, with fear in her eyes, said, "You'll never guess what happened to me and Gabe when I was putting him to bed." At that point, my heart sank because I knew what I had just experienced. I didn't say anything, but just let her talk. She said she was getting our younger son sleepy in his room, and she heard Gideon start screaming. She said right away, after he stopped screaming, she felt a palpable wave of total evil sweep through the room. She described it like a shock wave of evil energy that came blasting from our older son's room. She said it passed through her and our younger son, and that at that very moment, he started writhing. My wife was thrown back by the force and said it was the worst, most evil, horrible thing she'd ever experienced, and she could feel it in her bones, as she described. She said she will never forget the feeling of total evil and pure hatred sweeping through the room. She said she felt it right after my older son stopped screaming. I just stood and listened to what she was saying before I told her anything about what I had experienced. It didn't take me long to realize that our timelines matched up exactly. That moment, the moment she felt a wave of pure evil blast out of our son's room, was the exact moment I had commanded it to leave by the authority of Jesus. I stood there shocked for a while before I said, I have something to tell you also. We better go downstairs and talk. As we walked downstairs, I saw something I had not noticed before. On the floor were some shapes made of black masking tape that my wife made for the boys to jump on yesterday. She had been jumping from shape to learn the shapes. Well, the two most prominent ones were in the middle of the room, and the largest of all were a cross, and what was supposed to be a star, but was actually a pentagram. I had noticed shapes earlier in the day, but I hadn't noticed that one was a pentagram. I'm not saying this had anything to do with it, but it is so strange. We had an apparently demonic experience involving a cross the exact same day those symbols were on the floor of the living room. Needless to say, I ripped them up off the floor that moment. Soon after, we heard our older boy screaming again from upstairs. We ran up there. He said that another man was trying to take his cross. It was then that I remember hearing someone say that sage is supposed to help with stuff like this. My wife has a few essential oils and diffuser laying around for stress relief, but we hadn't used them in a long time. So I had her go get it, and she put some sage and frankincense in it, and put the diffuser in my older son's room. It calmed him down immediately, and he went sadly to sleep and slept the entire night after that. We have not had anything else happen yet, but sometimes it's weeks between events. So we will see what happens. I just want to be able to sleep soundly again. What do you guys suggest we do or think is going on here? Thanks in advance for the replies. And thank you for reading my overly lengthy post until the end. Hi everybody, it's curiousraven. Usually I do not respond to these posts, but I just had a feeling that I needed to. It needs to be said, I have been through things like this. I have an old video that I had an experience with a demonic presence. I told it to leave in God's name, that it wasn't welcome. And I just prayed and prayed to God. It eventually left. And I've never had a experience like that again. Yes, sage is a very useful tool to get rid of negative energy. I sage my house probably, I would say, every 3 months or so. I also put salt in the corners of each room. It just helps keep negative things out and helps energy be more positive. Because we walk around every day, we get a lot of negative energy attached to us, and you have to remove it sometimes for your well-being. What I can tell this man is that he needs to get in contact a priest and bless their house. He needs to do a blessing of the house. Even if he wants to get some holy water, just water blessed by a priest, and walk around and splash it in every corner of the house and tell negative energies that God is in his house and they're not welcome there and they need to leave. I hope this helps. That's the only thing I can really tell you to do. Stay tuned for my next video. Also, I have new merch out. I have made my own logo, and I think you'll like it because I love it. So head over to Spreadshirt. I'll have the link down below, and go check out my new merch. I will probably put on a sale as well. Okay, thank you. Love y'all. Bye. Remember, it's scary out there.